Hey y'all, it's David Ducker coming back at you, and today I'm going to be talking about the monster ecology of hobbits, of halflings, of the tiny people that are so often maligned and so often very poorly done. A lot of people don't like hobbits just because they've never seen them done well. So I'm going to talk about how I do them, and I think they are, while not the greatest race, they're still acceptable to include in a campaign. So let's start with appearance. So I like I like to go back to the original, the archetype, and that is of course Tolkien. That is the Lord of the Rings. That is the Hobbit, the book, or trilogy. I can't remember. Was it a trilogy? I thought New Line Cinema told me it was a trilogy, but hobbits are short. They have the curly brown hair, brown eyes, kind of tan, ruddy skin, and they tend to be quite rotund, quite chubby. They're a cute, chubby little kid type. Sometimes verging onto obesity. It's very easy when you're that short to get as wide as you are tall. So I usually run about 3 feet tall. I know some games have them at like 4 feet. I think that's a little too tall. For what they're useful for. Those appearance, personality-wise, hobbits are great at being gluttonous and lazy. They are sloth and gluttony. Those are their deadly sins. So they don't want to do any work. They do as little as possible. They'll lie, cheat, steal to get out of doing hard work. They'd rather some people would say they'd rather climb a tree and lie to you than stay on the ground and tell the truth. And if it involves getting them some kind of food, carnal pleasure, or preventing them from doing hard work or experiencing pain, yeah, they will lie. Like I said, they'll steal, they'll cheat, do whatever they need to do to be decadent. Now, fortunately, they're so lazy that they don't create these vast, decadent cities and civilizations. They tend to be just farming and eating, and they get married and get their hobbit loving on, and that's pretty much it. They're very simple folk. The thing about sloth and gluttony is the things you'll do to get it are what make it so evil. Or some would argue the lack of ambition is kind of evil by itself. But if they can find a way to do it simply without hurting anyone, and it's easier, that's what they're going to do. And usually it is. I farm so I can eat like a pig. I got married so I can engage my lust. And I just do as little of that farming work as I can. And that's about it. So in their own way, they're very egalitarian, because a hobbit would never oppress another hobbit to steal their stuff so they could get more food and more women and more wine, because it's too much work to oppress someone. It'd actually be much easier to just get all that stuff myself, because I can only consume so much, because they're not greedy for money like a dwarf, or power like a human might be. They just are very easy to meet needs, so they don't get very complicated with their systems and societies. So I find them very useful for that, is that they're so simple. Now, another thing they're useful from a meta perspective is a story. They are like, as a whole race, they are like the damsel in distress, because they can't defend themselves. They have like no fighters. They have like very, very little religious importance. So they have no one to defend them or organize them or guide them. So they're constantly the victim of any bad situation. Orcs show up. Who's the easiest person to attack? Hobbits. Lich Lord shows up. Who's the easiest person to enslave? Hobbits. There's a famine. Who's going to starve to death the quickest because they can't organize relief efforts? Hobbits. There's a magical incursion. Who is least able to erect magical barriers? Hobbits. They are the guy you have to save from everything as a race, as a culture, and that can be a lot of fun because it gives you something to do. You could run a whole campaign about, the protectors of Hobbiton. Because these are the guys who really need adventurers because they don't have an army. Like, it doesn't make sense for you to have an army and a police force and then need adventurers. But hobbits don't have an army or a police force, so they really do need adventurers to just help them. So they can be a lot of fun and use in that regard. As far as history goes, I love to equate, like in my setting, the original race of man was a slave race to the serpent folk at one time. Before that, before the coming of the serpent folk, they were quite happy, but the serpent people enslaved them. And eventually the serpent empire fell. The dragon kings fell. And the race of man split. And they became, orcs and goblins and elves and dwarves and all their sub-races. And hobbits specifically broke off of humans. Humans split. Humans actually came out from ogres. And then ogres basically formed humans, and then humans formed the hobbits. So I love to equate the hobbits against ogres. Because ogres take that gluttony and that sloth and that lust, and they actually have just enough ambition to make themselves horrible monsters. And see my video on ogres for exactly what horrible things they do to get out of work and to get more food and to get more slaves and love slaves and whatnot. But they are a great evil counterpart to hobbits. Not only are they big and fat, where the hobbits are short and fat, but their personalities are so close. They're almost the same. A little bit of ambition has turned the ogres completely evil. So I love that from a storytelling perspective, that they're so closely related to the ogres. So it's a fighting style. Hobbits don't fight. They're terrible fighters. They don't wrestle. They don't box. They don't organize armies, militias, slingers, archers, cavalry. That's all a lot of work. And hobbits despise hard work and pain, so they don't really do any of that. Which again leaves them so helpless, which can be a lot of fun for a story. It could beg the question, how are they still alive? But then you consider how quick they breed and how short their life cycles are, and that kind of answers itself. They just spread everywhere, trying to do as little work as possible and breed as much as possible. So let's go to food. So they love food. They farm. They grow crops. That's as much hard work as they're willing to do is just enough to make themselves really fat. They try to work it off, but they can't. They're too decadent in their small backwoods rural way. But so anyway, shelter, very simple, like stick huts or living in the side of hills, as Tolkien's hobbits did. Very simple. As long as it's comfortable, they don't care. It doesn't have to look good. It just has to be comfortable. Clothing, very much the same thing. It just has to be really comfortable. And they're not really that concerned about appearances, really. They like to get their lust on, so they like to aim towards more sexualized clothing. But in general, they're so concerned with comfort that even that take the back seat. So let's see, food, shelter, clothing. As I said, government, they don't have enough ambition or greed to force their will upon others. So they're very communal, very egalitarian. They're like these perfect villagers that never bother each other until there's like a shortage of food or women, and then horrible backstabbing comes about. But they'll steal and lie and cheat. They're not very violent people, because inflicting violence hurts. Like, you get in a fight, even if you win, it's gonna hurt you bad. Most of the time you're only gonna be slightly less hurt than the guy who lost. And hobbits know this, so they don't get in fights. So that's architecture. That's their clothing, their government. Like I said, very little government. Same thing with religion. I mean, they have so much fun on Earth that they don't really need to worry too much about spirituality. And a lot of organized religions, like they don't organize well, anyways. And a lot of organized religions, will only restrict the pleasures you can have. So hobbits don't front to that. So they probably do have some kind of religion for burials, for marriages, for childbirthings, even maybe to get some kind of divine magic if that's in your setting. But in general, they're not very religious people, and their religion is going to be very simplistic, very egalitarian and agrarian. That they worry about food and women and sleeping a lot. Get my afternoon nap. And that's about all they worry about. So their gods will be focused in those areas as well. Like they're probably not going to have a war god or a god of judgment and justice or maybe even of merchants and roads because they don't really care about that stuff. So they'll probably have the god of love and the god of like children and the god of lots of food, the god of wine. Like these are the hobbit kind of gods that they want to get going on. So I think that's basically my ramble about how I do hobbits. I think they work really well in that context. They're a pretty minor race, but they like it that way, if at all possible, to slip through the cracks. So I'd love to hear how you do hobbits, if you've seen them done well. If you've seen them done in a way that's not a racial stereotype of gypsies. Or if you've seen them done, adding to these ideas that I just threw out, I'd love to hear about that because I've seen them done poorly. I've seen them done poorly a lot. Like I said, gypsies, and I'm like, okay, well, it's kind of interesting. Get a nomad gypsy kind of gimmick. Like, let's explore the depth that you've created. And they're like, oh, we haven't done depth. We just said they're gypsies with the serial number filed off. And we didn't elaborate or expand on that. And I'm like, I hate that. I hate when you take a good race and just don't explain it well. There's no depth. And then they'll take a race that's not even very good in the first place, and they'll do it poorly. And I'm like, well, now I'm not going to use that race, am I? Because it wasn't good to start with, and you've done nothing to make it better. So, anyways, that's how I do hobbits. Let me know how you do hobbits. If you played a fun hobbit character who engaged in this lusty, slothful gluttony, I'd love to hear about it. So I'm going to sign out. Everybody have a good day in YouTube land.